Welcome to Hearts and Minds, a podcast that will help you to discover the extraordinary in your ordinary life. So whether it is in your work, your relationships, or your spiritual life, at Hearts and Minds we aim to help you to learn to love the life that you have and to discover greater love for yourself, others and God. This is Maura Cassidy. Our guest on today's podcast is Chiara Degenfeld, and she is joining us all the way from the Netherlands. You're very welcome, Chiara.
Thank you very much.
And she is going to talk to us about an amazing topic which combines psychology and theology. And it's all about the theology of the body for today. So, Chiara, you're very welcome. And so first off, I just want to ask you, could you tell us a bit about yourself and why you studied psychology and theology as an undergrad? You know, do they have something in common, or what was the reason?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's a true joy to be here from the Netherlands. So my name is Chiara and I'm 29 years old and I am fully Dutch. My husband is German-Austrian and we currently live indeed in the Netherlands. And I've studied psychology and then later I did a master's in theology abroad. And I've always been interested in the human person. And with psychology, I really learned more about the psychology of the human person, the brain, etc. And then later with theology, I went more into the anthropology. So what does it mean to be a human person? And I think that combination of so many philosophers who have studied the human person together with the science of the human person can show us a lot about, what it means to be a human.
To be a human being.
Yeah.
And, from your study of the human person, why should we be excited? Because, in our culture, sometimes we can be quite negative about the things human beings can do, or we see ourselves in terms of limited or not perfect or even constructed. You're quite excited from your study, I gather, about what it is to be human.
Totally.
Can you tell us why, Chiara? Would you like to share that with us?
I think actually exactly what you say. Often we think we're limited. And yes, we are limited in a certain way. But we are also, I believe in, I experience myself, we're created with so much creativity and talents. And actually it started when I was a teenager and I was working together with a musical group, and there one of our aims was to help children and teenagers to discover their talents and through that to become themselves. And we saw children coming in super shy and like not even daring to say, my name is. And 5 years later, you saw them just standing in front of an audience or standing in front of a group of other kids or teenagers and teaching them. And you just saw, in their whole body posture, you saw a change, and you see it in the eyes of people also.
So you believe we have this capacity to change and to tap into who we really are.
That's exactly what you say. I think this point to tap in who we really are. Often it's, I think, there are blockages, there are traumas, there is our education, there's our culture, etc. And it can help us, but that can also block us. And I think we are created. So I'm also a teacher in elementary school, and you see when the kids come in, they're so curious about everything in life and they want to discover life and themselves. And then you actually see the older they grow, the less curious they become. And my goal is that we ourselves and others around us, that we become more curious, because isn't it beautiful? I think all of us have ever seen a child being curious or open. I mean, that's the most beautiful thing to see. And
no, absolutely. And I suppose that and as you say, it's sad when you see the opposite happening. And how can we remain open and how can we remain curious? What do you say is so unique about a human person? If you were to give me one liner, what would that be?
Unique about the human person is his joy, his or her joy. And it's funny what you say, this curiosity. How can we stay curious? I've actually learned that 1 year. I was living abroad and I had a roommate, and she was a few years older than I was. We were beginning of our 20s, and she was curious about everything in life. And she would be outside and see a butterfly and just say, "Oh, whoa, look at that!" And it wasn't childish. She was really not like, she was really in her 20s, but it was so beautiful, and that touched me a lot and taught me a lot. And through that, I think, and I've seen it in so many people, yes, there are many difficulties we go through and we suffer, but these things can really bring us this deep joy and keep us open to actually so much what we do also receive.
It's interesting you say what we receive, because sometimes I wonder, do we think we need to be the person to have all the answers to solve everything?
We often,
and I know you
think that, and I mean, I'm the same. I love control. And it's, I think one of the biggest lessons for me in life is to let go of control. But then when I'm working on it, it's something so beautiful. I've been given so much back. And a very tiny example of that, I think for me, is this is the first year I have a vegetable garden. And you can only do so much, but you can't control the weather. I can't control how much sun and rain and etc. we have. And it's so beautiful because you have to let go of, you can do what you can do, but you have to let go of a lot. And there I've really seen, like, okay, you let go, and then you see a growth is, a process of growth is happening. And just right before we started the podcast, I just harvested a cucumber, it's, I love to see that.
Nature tells us so much, doesn't it? Step back, let things happen.
Yeah.
I know you speak a lot about love and how so much of our own understanding of ourselves is because, or misunderstanding of ourselves is because we don't realize that what love is and how much we need it and what it looks like. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I often, when I think or talk about love, the first thing I think is I'm so lucky because I've received a lot of love in my life. So I've had examples where I could not only theoretically learn about love, but experience it, which first of all starts with my parents. I've loving parents who actually also, the love between them, it was always a big example, and their love towards us as their children. And I think love is, it's giving and receiving. So we can give of ourselves, but through that we receive a lot. And that is, it's a huge mystery, because actually we tend to take and to grab, but isn't it more beautiful? And I think we all have small experiences of that where you help one another, and through that you receive so much more love also back. And love really helps us to actually realize our value, how beautiful we are as a human person. And I wish that to everyone. Yeah.
And I suppose that's from a psychological point of view, of course.
It's so interesting. There are many researches also which show that people who are more looking at others instead of themselves, so more helpful, etc., they are in general also happier. And
it's the more outward focused. Yeah.
I don't know.
Which of course
I find it so interesting how the psychology actually a lot. It shows what we experience. Yeah.
And then that, in a sense, your theological study has also backed that up.
Yeah.
So it's like they're all saying the same thing. But going back to that point which you made, that many studies show that those who are more other focused tend to be happier. Can I ask, is that because, like, what do we have wrong about love in our society, do you think?
I think there are different aspects there. I think, first of all, we're so much searching for love that we think love is satisfaction. Satisfying my needs and desires at this moment. And we see that in in small ways. If this thought of satisfaction, if now I want a burger, I just call, and within 10 minutes in front of my front door, there's a warm burger being delivered. And this is to show that we mix up, I think, love with satisfaction, with pleasure. Yes, there is an aspect of pleasure in love, obviously, but love is not this getting for myself. It's really this going out to the other, this altruistic aspects. And sometimes I think I even can't explain it in words because it's so human, and I think we all have experienced it in little moments.
And I suppose sometimes maybe because, as you say, in Western world, in our cultures, it's so easy to get what we want when we want it, that when a relationship takes work or we don't see the same way as other people, well, then we presume we're not compatible. Or that somehow, something's wrong with me, as opposed to really knowing what love is from the outset, And so if love is not satisfaction and love is going out to the other person, are there any other characteristics of love that you think are important? And I know you're recently married as well, Chiara, so that'll be an interesting thing to explore with you.
I think exactly that love is experiencing, I experience it from my husband and for myself also towards him, accepting the other fully as the other person is. Not wanting to change the other person. There's also my mother always said, marry the person, not thinking that person will change. Because often, we think, no, but maybe that will change.
I'll change him.
No, that's not the case. So for me, really what I experience is love is that I am being accepted as I am, with my talents, with my weaknesses, with my moods, etc. Everything. And that's just incredible. I've experienced it from my family, but to experience that from one's husband, that's and
can I ask a rather personal question? Do you feel you're a better person as a married Chiara?
I think so. In the sense that it gets out the best of me. And yes, I still have, and I will have them until the end of my life, my weaknesses and my moods and everything. And I also hear it from people around me, like, wow, actually more since we're engaged, obviously already started then, but that people say, wow, you're so much more, how do I say this in English? Radiant.
Content. Oh, radiant.
Yeah, and indeed attentive to others, etc. And I think that's because I have the security of I'm unconditionally loved. And it's beautiful. We already started that before we got married, to very regularly ask one another for forgiveness. Because through that, like, I know I am weak, but through that I can also give my forgiveness to the other and say, hey, yes, you are weak, but I forgive you. And so through that, I love you.
When we were talking earlier, you mentioned something quite nice about your limitations.
Yeah.
And what your husband had to say about those.
Yeah. It's, so since I'm married, I also actually experience much more how weak and limited I am. Before you think, oh, I'm going to be the perfect wife, blah, blah, blah. Well, no. Because you're much more confronted with yourself, because there's a person very close to you. You're living in the same house. You can't run away from each other, so to say. And I find it hard. I'm, in a certain way, a perfectionist. And I find it hard to accept my limitations, first of all, and then second, to show them to another person. And there have been several moments where I said, but actually, Chiara, at the moments when you are weak and you allow yourself to be weak and show it to me, that's where I feel like I can get through and I can love you. And that's the moment beautiful. Where I'm just crying in his arms and saying, I don't know how to do it. And yeah.
That's very nice.
Yeah.
Very inspiring, really, is that we tend to think of our weaknesses as something we should hide, as something wrong, but it's something beautifully human.
Yeah,
and
we've
makes us all
experienced
much more
that
attractive.
they bring us actually closer to one another.
Wow.
But only when one really accepts them and shows them to the other.
Fair point. You're also fascinated by, well, maybe before I step into that topic, you've talked about desires as a really beautiful and a good thing, okay? From a human perspective, but also from the perspective of theology, from God's perspective. And here I'm talking about the Judeo-Christian God. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because for most people, when they think of desires, they think it as something negative. They think it's sometimes as well a bit of a cliche, that, for example, the Catholic Church comes down on sex because it's bad, it's sinful, and it's wrong to desire somebody. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, yeah, I do really believe and experience, and I've studied it also, that God really made us with desires. And often we can tend to one side or the other extreme, which is either I'm a stoic, so desires are bad and I have to push them away. Or I'm an addict, acting as an addict, which is I have a desire, I immediately need to gratify it. I've once heard the example with, for example, there's a chocolate cake in front of you and you've had one piece of the chocolate cake. Well, for those who are lovers of chocolate cake, what do you want? It's a second piece. And then there are three choices. There's one like, oh, it's bad, I can't, I should. And you close yourself off, so to say, and you push it away, this thought, this desire. The second is you immediately get a second piece, but after a second piece, you want a third piece. So you get a third piece. Yeah, it's not healthy, not helping you. And then there's the third way, which is a virtuous desire, which means actually to sit in the desire and to realize we have incredibly deep desires and not all of them can be fulfilled here by the earthly things. So I do believe, me as being a Christian, that our deepest desire at the end is for God and to fully know Him and love Him, but actually then to realize that all the desires we have here are kind of a foretaste, an image of this desire for God, and God will fulfill many desires here on earth, but this deep, full desire in us at the end will only be fulfilled fully by Him. And in a certain way, I experienced that also in life, and especially now in marriage, where yes, it's beautiful, the desires I have in my husband does fulfill many, but at the end I do need God who fully fulfills me. But I think we've often been raised so much with desires are bad and push them away, but we're passionate people, and from our passion, the greatest things and projects come out. And for me, a big example is, for those who are Christian might know her, it's Saint Catherine of Siena. She was full with passion, and because she had these strong desires of saving the church and loving the church, she went to the Pope to tell the Pope what to do. Just a woman somewhere. And I think and
in those times, really,
exactly,
when women didn't have the same freedoms they have now.
Yeah. And so I think often we're a bit afraid. We're afraid to show this through passion and to give place to desires in their heart, because they hurt. Because we want to gratify them right away, but not always can we can't fulfill them right now, or not in this way, etc. But we should give them space and sort of sit in the ache of the desire.
And can you talk a little, you mentioned there the three options, the stoic, the addict, and then the sort of
virtuous,
the best option, which is the virtuous. Yeah. If you're somebody who is veering towards the addicted or the addict approach, and you see in your that typically, I think for many people they see choice in terms of the two options. A stoic is in desire is bad, so I'm not going to even try and feel it, and then the other, which is inhuman really, and then the other one is obviously the addict, which is I give a pleasure. I always give in to whatever desire I have whenever I have it, because I feel it, and then the virtuous approach, which is, I suppose, it's engaging your desires with your ideals. You're thinking, Is this good for me right now? Is this, you could be married to one man but desire another man. Do you give expression to that desire? Well, no, because you love your husband and you want to love him more. Can you talk to us a little bit more about how to cultivate that space, it would seem, from what you're saying, so that you can actually decide, your desires are there, but then you decide where to lead them, and you decide where to lead them, and how that can become more of a reality for people.
Yeah. It's beautiful what you say, because I think also that leads to so much freedom. Whereas we think often, like all of us in our daily life, freedom is when immediately I can do or take whatever I want. But for example, if I've had that second piece of chocolate cake and I feel nauseous afterwards, that's not making us more free and not more happy also. And I think how many, especially for women of us, have had, after whatever, eating too much, have then had this feeling of I'm disappointed in myself and I feel bad and etc. Whereas I think how one can start practicing this in daily life is through having moments of reflection. And so moments where you sit down in silence, and for me, for example, it really works to write. So I just write things down and I see what's actually going on in my heart. And for that, 5 minutes of silence is not enough. I would say at least 15 minutes, if not more, because only then we can start to get deeper into our hearts. And so we sit down and we just start writing what's going on in my heart. And then we can start exploring different thoughts. And maybe we're at that moment, we're very restless, and we can see what thoughts am I writing down and what's coming here. And I very often see with myself, if I start writing, actually, then I read it and I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that this was going on in me. And so we start reflecting, and so we start giving space to our thoughts and our desires. And that already is step one, and a biggest step. Because as long as we say they're bad, desires are bad, then we're even more, and that's just psychologically how it works, we're first gonna fight it, and then we give in and we go to the other extreme. But to sit in them, and for that, silent time and reflection is very important.
That's very powerful, Chiara, because sometimes we just don't give ourselves permission to actually stop and be, which is so human. We're not machines. Just moving on a little bit. You're a practicing Catholic, Chiara. You mentioned that in a previous conversation. Did you always, accept the Catholic Church's teaching on sex and marriage? We've talked here about desires, and you sound to me like somebody who has a very integrated, holistic approach. Were you, because you've combined the psychological, the human, and the theological, they all seem to fit beautifully together. Was that always the case? Was it a journey for you? And can you tell us a bit about that journey, if it was the case?
Yeah. Of course it was a journey, I think. I hope for every person, because if something is a journey, it's something which we really integrate instead of it being rules. And yes, I've been super lucky, by the way. I've been raised, I'm from a very joyful Catholic family where the faith wasn't about rules, but it was about a way of life. And even from my grandparents, I got this, and my own parents. That has always helped me to not too much see also the teachings of the church on the morals and sexuality as rules, but to see it as, hey, the church loves us, and it's as a pedagogue helping me on my journey. And of course, when I was a teenager, I asked questions about it, and thanks be to God, I had places where I could go and just say, hey, this to me sounds stupid. I doubt this, etc., etc. And
the great thing as well, you've shared resources with us that you found helpful in your journey. So that's nice. We'll be able to share those with listeners at the end.
Yes, and thanks be to God, I've had that already from a young age on. As a teenager, I had good resources. And those helped me. And yes, I talked with my mother about it. But as a teenager, you need things outside of your mother. At some point, you don't want to do what your mother tells you. And these resources really helped me a lot. And then, through studying the things, I've always been a person to ask questions. Why is it the case? And never out of that, I only realized later, never out of an attitude of distrust, but an attitude of trust. And so to not say, why is the church teaching this and that's stupid, but to say, hey, why is it teaching this? And I was realizing, hey, I am only 29 years old. The church is 2,000 years old, and in those 2,000 years, it has, as a loving parent, come up with all these teachings and guidings, but not as rules because it wants to punish us, but it loves us. And then I'm thinking, who am I? Not even 30 years old, and that's 2,000 years old. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because you even read, the famous line from Saint Augustine, who lived, he was in the first centuries of the church, and he said, "Love and do as you will." So there was a great sense of freedom and desire in his life, and yet he could embrace fully all those things you've been saying.
And it's exactly what God wants for us. Is this true freedom? And yes, the church also makes mistakes, but God not.
And you have a lovely quote which you shared with me, and I'll put it up at the end in the resources, which says purity, which is this whole idea of love, how we safeguard our love. That's really what the virtue of purity is. And just to quote it, it's a few lines long, so if listeners can bear with me, and I think, Chiara, thank you for sharing it with us. Purity is a state of peace in which your sexual desires and actions are in full agreement with your ideals, or you could put in their purpose. Living according to our ideals always brings us joy, and everyone can learn how to bring their actions into accord with their ideals through well-crafted practices. And you've just shared with us that beautiful one of reflection and exploration and curiosity and the virtuous approach. Can I ask as well, one of your specializations is theology of the body, which is extraordinary because, of course, it tells us that the body is sacred. We think of sacred, we think of the tabernacle, or we think of, we think of a beautiful sort of liturgical item or the Blessed Eucharist. But theology, which is the science of God, teaches us that the body, your body and mine, is sacred. Why do you think this is so groundbreaking, which I think it is too? And can you explain that a little to us?
Yeah, I think for centuries we've seen the body as it can transport my soul from A to B, period. And it's mostly it's actually a limitation in my freedom and etc. And through the theology of the body, we can discover how the body is actually, how one we are. So our soul and body are one. And I've heard this quote where someone said, we are our body. We do not have a body, we are our body. And I mean, very small, we all believe that. I don't say my body is going to the store. I say I am going to the store. So that's already we all believe that, but we probably don't realize it. And it's so beautiful because our body is a sign of God's love for us. And through our body, we can show His love, or for those who don't believe, we can show love in general. And that's just incredible to me. It's like small little thing, like when my husband buys me flowers, he needs his body for it, and he shows love through the sign of the flowers.
Which is beautiful. And also on a deeper level, I just, those quotes which, I don't know if you know Saint Josemaria Escriva, wrote a quote. Your worktop, is your altar. In other words, by doing your work well, you're literally you're bringing God into your world, like your altar. You're making your work sacred. And he said the same about the marriage bed. He said, the sexual act and that unity between a couple, that is also an altar. It's sacred because God made it. And as you say, that whole idea of reflection is such a beautiful thing to do, because it might help us to literally dig into those things that we tell ourselves or that we read, but we don't fully embrace the depth and how radical they are in our world.
And we're so one as a person, but often I think we live such in ourselves a separated life in a certain way. And
very fragmented.
And it's so beautiful to discover I'm one, and I carry myself with my beauty and my brokenness everywhere, and to discover what that means. It's worth it.
Extraordinary. And can I ask, how does a personal question, how does your understanding of theology of the body affect your relationship in marriage with your husband?
For me, it really helps me to realize that my signs is not just nice and good for my husband, but that they are really meant to show love and to show God's love to him. And which is in all the different signs I do with my body. It's cooking for him. It's kissing him. It's everything which it really helps me to not be directed on myself, especially I think in the physical atmosphere where we can tend to be too much focused on my own pleasure. But pleasure is beautiful, but it's a side effect. It's a gift. Pleasure is given to us by God, but we don't need to grab it. And it's really beautiful to when you can both experience that. And that's with, how do you say that? Ups and downs. But for us, it really helps a lot of communication in there. Constant communication.
Explaining. Clarifying.
Yeah, a lot of asking.
Because you're not the same person. What does this mean to you? Yeah, absolutely. And, even that idea, as you say, of expressing so much through our bodies. It's hugely powerful. It's hugely powerful. Some women are, deciding not to have children because they're fearful of bringing them into this world, or they're fearful of a commitment to marriage. And there are many negative things about our world. As a young woman, a year into your marriage, have you anything to say on that topic or any thoughts on that?
I understand the fear. I think so many of us have either experienced or seen it in others, so much brokenness and hurt through people, being close and then hurting one another so much. So first of all, I want to say I understand the fear. But there I also want to say, what does fear? That's also a very psychological thing. Fear blocks us always. And fear is never a sign, also when we talk in the Christian faith, of God. And so there, it's very good to see, where does my fear come from? Because fear isn't a sign we shouldn't do something. In this case, yes, fear if whatever, there's thunder and I should hide, or that's a healthy fear. But I think the psychological fear, we should always go back and see, where does it come from? And then start digging in those places and start bringing them to the light. Because once then those are brought to the light, we can work through them and we can heal. And then, yes, we live in a tough world, but gosh, we also live in a beautiful world. There's so many beautiful things. And there, I think every age, I've actually quite many conversation with my husband about it. Like, so often you say, oh, it was so much better 100 years ago or whatever. But every age has its challenges, but also every age has its beauties. And there I want to say, start, if you're so full of fear, start looking at what are the beautiful things and start surrounding yourself with people who are positive. Because that's also a psychological fact. We become like the people we surround ourselves with. And so if we're around with a lot of very negative, fearful people, we become negative and fearful. If we're around joyful people, we can inherit that from them, so to say. And so, I would say really go through the fears, name them, write them down and go through them, talk with people about them, and surround yourself with good people. That's for us really a thing. We've really tried to surround ourselves with good friends. And there I see that. So we don't have children yet, but for example, one of my sisters, she has a bunch of small children, which is tough, but so beautiful. If I see the children, they're all like running and happy and auntie this and that, and they're how are they able to do it is because they surround themselves with good people who can support them. We can't do it alone in life, and often we think we have to do it alone. That's what society teaches us. You are alone and you have to do it alone, but we're not. We're made for community, so reach out.
Super. Chiara, I think we're going to have to end the podcast. That has been a really lovely conversation. I think many of our listeners will find it very inspiring. And I know Chiara doesn't like the video. I don't like my video, but you have to see Chiara's smile. So do go on YouTube, listeners, and have a look, because it really radiates the room. The great thing as well is we're going to actually put at the end of the podcast all those great resources that you've shared with me. I'm also going to say to listeners, this is part one of a series of podcasts, and as you'd expect, Chiara has a number of other strings to her bow, and she's going to dig into a little bit on the danger of the addicted side, which of course is very much out there in our culture, and something I think we're quite fearful of, which is the addicted side, which is pornography. So we will explore that a little bit in terms of its impact on relationships and what to be aware of and how to sidestep it, avoid it, or to push back. But I don't want to take away from those final words of yours, Chiara. They were just lovely. And I want to thank my listeners, all our listeners, for listening in today, as always. And please do keep coming with your suggestions and comments on the podcast that we have been doing over these last few months and years. Thank you.